I have the experience of governance. I've been on the school board. This is my second term. I've learned a lot in the process, and I've kind of started to recognize where the disconnect between the people and the governance body is happening, and I'm ready to share that on the city council.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
We are back on the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. We're doing another St. Paul Ward 4 candidate episode. If you hadn't heard, there's a special election August 12th in Ward 4 in St. Paul to fill the remaining 3 years of a vacant seat on the city council. And joining me today is Chauntyll Allen, who is a candidate for Ward 4 in St. Paul.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So give me the rundown of all the big important campaign issues that people are bringing to you this year in St. Paul. What are people concerned about, like a top 3 or 4?
Definitely property taxes is a huge one across the city. But Ward 4 property taxes, development is a big one, pertaining to housing specifically, community safety. And so we have the light rail that goes right down University. I mean, I think right now people are really concerned about the Cub Foods closing down in the Midway. And so food insecurity. And then that's tied to the community safety. And then another one is the reduction of library hours down on Dale, which, you know, when it's a light rail, even though it's not necessarily in your ward, it's still access for the ward. And so I think people are concerned about that.
So that's interesting. You mentioned development concerns. Like, what specifically about development are people concerned about?
There's a few different things. I mean, the housing insecurity is huge. Like, we recognize that a lot of the issues we're dealing with on University are definitely tied to housing instability. But there's also a few other issues that are happening. There's over by St. Thomas, the St. Thomas population is expanding. Go figure. They went D1. I'm a basketball coach, so when they went D1, I knew this was going to happen. But they're expanding, and unfortunately, it's causing a bit of a rift between regular property owners and the expansion that needs to happen. I got pros and cons on both sides of the issue. You know what I'm saying? And so it's really about sitting down at the table and having those conversations and making negotiations around what's really important to people. And I think that the city has been lacking those conversations. I think across the board in a lot of different areas, they're just not having conversations with the residents to the point where the residents are feeling heard. And so that's what's happening over in the St. Thomas area. There's also another development that's happening over kind of by the U of M area that people are concerned about. My guess is there's going to be an influx of housing in that area. And so then how do we start to make adjustments around the needs? So traffic flow, basic stuff like that. But it also goes back to that food insecurity. Like, where are people going to get their basic needs in the area where they're building and developing? And I think and making smart decisions. You know, for instance, they've kind of blocked in one of the blocks over in that area because they're doing construction along a particular area, and it's blocking people in. And it's like, well, let's be smart about where and how we start to develop so that we make sure that we're still providing access for the people that live there. And so things like that, just, you know, that's development is just really having those conversations with community as they see as the development is happening and the change is coming. We have to have conversations with the residents that are living here about what is important to them to make sure that we're addressing those particular issues. I mean, sometimes it's sustaining the alley behind them, right? Don't cut the alley out of my back because I really need that. And everybody on the block feels the same. So then how can we come up with a plan so we don't get rid of that alley, right? But we have to have those conversations with the people that are living in that area before the development starts to break ground. And I think that that's a lot of what's been happening is people are just making decisions and moving forward with those decisions without having real genuine conversations with the homeowners.
You know what is secretly the biggest issue in Ward 4? I'm going to tell you what the biggest issue is here from my perch in Minneapolis is I'm just hearing constantly about Summit Avenue, just the Summit Avenue, the endless controversy about a street reconstruction that is maybe not going to happen for a couple of more years, at least on Summit Avenue. Do you have a position on Summit Avenue? What are you telling people when they ask you about the bike lane, about the trees? What's your take?
I mean, again, it comes down to smart politics. And I think, of course we want to create a bikeable city. Of course we want to reduce the carbon in our air in the city of St. Paul. And so we're going to create a bikeable city, but can we be smart about where these bike lanes go and where the bike routes are? I was riding with really thinking about this because I don't bike. It's not my jam, but it is my son's jam. He passed away about 5 years ago, or 7 years ago now. But before that, he worked at Cycles for Change, and he was part of, he did some organizing at McAllister College around the bike lanes in St. Paul. This is one of his passions. And one of the things I think that I carry from him is just being smart about it and then making sure that everybody knows and understands what we're doing as we make the change, right? So to put a bike lane down Summit Avenue when we know there's an excessive amount of traffic on that particular street, of course bikers need to go east and west, but do they have to go east and west on Summit? Do they have to go east and west on Grand, right? Do bikers have to go east and west on Snelling? And can we create safer streets with bike lanes for people to ride east and west on and north and south on, and then create a campaign for the city so that we know, I just don't ride down Pascal very often so that I can leave room for bikers to bike, right? Unless my house is right in that area. And so how do we start to create the biking culture? And not just amongst the bikers, but amongst people who don't bike, so that we can recognize that this is something that's important, not just to one group of people, but to everybody. But I think we have to connect the carbon in the air and the bikeable city. And we need people to really understand how that's impacting our communities.
So I think...
And I can give an example of what I mean by Maxfield Elementary, which is in Ward 1, but right along the freeway and not far from Midway area, has the highest amount of asthma rates in the whole state. So when we bring that up to the community, they kind of go, oh, they gasp, right? They're like, oh my goodness, why? What's going on? And they want to resolve the issue. But if nobody knows that that's an issue out there, then everybody just keeps driving in their cars and telling bikes to get out the way rather than really understanding why bikers need to bike and why we need more people biking so that we can reduce asthma rates in our community. And so how do we start to really have those conversations and tie these things together so that people have a deeper understanding of the environmental crisis that we're really rolling into?
So do you think Summit is the wrong place for a bike lane? Because what a lot of people say is if you want to establish that biking culture, you have to make it safe enough for people who maybe not the hardcore types, but casual bikers to want to take it up. They have to feel safe before they do it. And the argument for putting it on Summit is the current bike lane there is just not safe. So is that the right place for it?
I think streets that are major roadways are just not the right spots for bikes. What is the street that's right off of, Portland, or one of those streets that go east and west that's in between Summit and, say, Selby, right? One of those streets could be an easy east and west street, and we could develop crossways across Snelling and Lexington and all of the other major north-south streets so that the bikes can get across those streets. But yet when they're going down those streets, there's not a lot of traffic. And so it gives an opportunity for them to really just bike free. And unless you live on Portland, right? If we have a campaign across our city where we understand that Portland is the biking street, then I'm going to take Marshall, right? I'm going to drive down Marshall. Why would I drive down Portland when I know as a St. Paul resident, we use Portland as a street for bikers, and we should create spaces like that if we really.
Then I think, what do the people on Portland believe? Like, are they going to be upset? Because you run into this thing in local politics where the people on Summit are upset and they say, put it somewhere else. And then you go that someplace else, people on that street are going to, don't put it here. This is our street. Our street is the precious street that you can't disturb or change. Do you worry that if you start letting the wealthiest people in the city dictate where projects go, it won't be in their neighborhood, it'll be in somebody else's neighborhood where they don't want it?
I definitely worry about that, but I don't know if this is one of those situations. I think this is one of those situations where it comes down to smart politics. And if we're designing bike lanes for the future and we're putting them on some of our busiest streets, as we know that cars are going to increase. We're going to get more people in the city. So why would we create bike lanes on those streets where it's going to become congested at some point, and now the bikes are battling the cars? That just doesn't make sense. And if we develop this culture across city, the people on Portland would understand. And I guess I'm not trying to create just only bikeable streets. Cars can drive down Portland. So if you live on Portland, yeah, use Portland. But if you don't live on Portland, use Marshall. You know what I'm saying? Like, go east and west on Summit. Use Summit. We left it wide open for you. I also have concerns about just the construction along Summit. I know I used to work at Hidden River Middle School back in the day when it was Ramsey Middle School, and we were having some pipe issues. We won't get into the depth of what it is, but as the maintenance people kind of busted out the wall in the basement, they identified that there's a river running underneath that school. And so that's on Summit and I don't know, between Snelling and Fairview. So right, and it's Summit and Grand. And there's literally a river running underneath there, hence why they changed the name to Hidden River Middle School. But what does that do as we start to break up the ground? And then why aren't we looking at some of these fresh waterways that exist underneath our ground? And what can we do with those? I don't know. I'm not on city council yet, but I definitely have a lot of questions about that, considering that water is becoming a scarce source in our nation. And we just have it kind of flowing around underneath our feet. So there's like lakes and everything underneath St. Paul.
You mentioned
I hear.
You mentioned asthma rates a little earlier, and like if you look at maps of like pollution, poison in the air, it's centered around I-94, and there's this proposal from R Streets, Minnesota, for the Twin Cities Boulevard. Have you been getting questions about that? Do you have a position on whether you like the idea of a Twin Cities Boulevard to replace I-94? Are you a supporter of that?
No, actually. I am a fourth generation Rondo kid. And so I heard the stories of our displacement. And I recognize the impact that's had on my family's economic status. And so I don't want to see not just my family. I really want to include the entire community and how that displaced the entire community. And to bring in another development it concerns me that we may have a lot of our elders who were able to sustain their homes in Rondo, who will then be displaced. A lot of the folks that were children during that displacement now still live in that area, but they're all on fixed income. And one of the biggest issues I brought up at the beginning was the property taxes in the city right now. And so I think another development is only going to exacerbate that issue and really push out a lot of elders. And that concerns me. I am concerned about the carbon levels along 94. I think that as a school board member, one of the things that we're implementing is planting more trees along 94 where we have schools at. And I think that the city should take action also around how to mitigate some of the environmental impacts of the freeway, whether it's planting trees or really just, I don't know what else they could do, but I know trees is one of the big asks from community, and that's how we're responding. And then, of course, updated HVAC systems and stuff, but that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, so no, I am not. I'm not in support of more development in the Rondo community along 94.
So on housing, on your website, you say simply building more housing and opening more shelters will not solve our housing crisis. Can you talk about how what we need to do in addition to that? What's missing right now that would help improve the situation?
Yeah. I mean, when I'm looking, I do a lot of street outreach, and we were doing a lot of outreach along 94 in Unidale Mall, Snelling, Hamlin for probably the last 5 to 6 years. And one of the things that I see is that it's not just about the amount of housing that's available. It's about the untreated mental health, chemical dependency, the poverty gap that we're dealing with in the city of St. Paul. People don't have access to money or opportunities at jobs. And so I really want to look at like a full wraparound service that supports people around housing. It's more than just let's build more buildings, because they've built more buildings, right? And we see what those so-called affordable buildings are. We're talking, $1,100 for a 1-bedroom, and that's not affordable in the city of St. Paul when, the poverty gap is the way that it is. That's what I could say. Building more buildings like that, what I've learned as living in one of those buildings, I lived in one for about 3 years, is often those are not the residents of the city that live in there. Those are people that are from outside of the city, that are from rural parts of Minnesota, or even from, out of the country. There was a lot of folks that were not even from this country, but going to school at the University of Minnesota, because the building that I was at, so they were going to school and doing what they needed to do. But yeah, I mean, who are we really building this housing for? Are we building it for our families to be able to raise our children and thrive in the city of St. Paul? Are we building housing for people to just come in and live for 5 to 7 years, find the love of their life, and then go buy property in Woodbury? And what kind of city are we really trying to build? I grew up in a city where people would ask me, what's your mom's name? What's your dad's name? And when I said that, they knew who I was. They knew my aunts and uncles. They knew my grandparents. They knew what organizations my parents were connected to, or what jobs they worked at. And they understood who I was as a person. And with the influx of in and out, in and out, in and out, does that really create community? Does that really build community? We want people to move into our city, but we want people to move into our city and develop, have families, and live here, for a long time. Get to know the community, not just use it as a squatting spot.
So let's talk about rent control. So St. Paul has become kind of an example for opponents of rent control in Minneapolis to look across the river and say, well, don't do what they did. It didn't work there. And I wonder if you think that's accurate. Do you agree with the way rent control was done in St. Paul? Do you think the changes that have been made recently were the correct ones? Do you think more changes need to be made there? Where do you stand?
So yes, I definitely am in support of rent control. I think we definitely need to have some enforcement around how companies monotonize housing. And I'm going to tie in a couple different explanations of that, which is the situation at St. Thomas University. People are finding loopholes in the housing ordinance and the zoning for student housing, and they're able to build these huge units that house 35, 40 people, but they don't have to actually register it as a business. They're registering themselves as landlords. And so they're finding these loopholes to make like thousands and thousands of dollars and cause these huge impacts in community. But there's no real regulation on anything that they're doing. There's no, they don't have to adhere to the regulation around green space, the way that they're building the units, and they're charging, extremely high rent for like one bedroom, like just the bedroom itself with shared living. It creates this opportunity for capitalists to just come in and take advantage of the housing market, because housing is something that everybody needs. I just recently moved out of one of those condos down by 280 and we moved into a house, and we were looking to rent a house because property taxes are way too high for me to afford in this moment on the salary that I get at the school board. And so we were looking to rent a house, and it took like about 8 months for us to find somewhere, because the majority of these properties are owned by companies. And these companies are managing it, and a lot of the actual owners of they're owned by landlords, but they're managed by these companies. And the landlords don't even live in the city of St. Paul. They may not even live in this country. As a matter of fact, I found out that my landlord doesn't even live in this country. And so he could care less about the basic maintenance of the property. They just adhere to what the law says. And right now, currently, there's a law that says that you can just take the keys from the previous renter and hand them over to the next renter without doing any sort of maintenance or cleaning. Now, there's fire codes and stuff, of course, that they need to do, but when it comes down to like environmental impacts that would have, I mean, they don't clean like the ducts or the fireplace, or they didn't clean the yard. There was like a den in the backyard of something that was living back there. And so how do we regulate these companies so that they provide a particular service so that it doesn't lead towards slums? And that's what I see happening in the future. If we just allow these companies and these big developers to just come in and build and then just operate on their own accord, they're capitalists. They're here to make the most money possible. And that has nothing to do with how the humans are treated in the process. And so we do need rent control, because as development happens, we saw it with the soccer stadium, and now we're going to see more development going up around the soccer stadium. People will, not necessarily independent landlords, because I find that individual landlords are really working hard to sustain affordability in their properties. But these big developers, these capitalists, are going to continue to increase rent so that they can make more and more money. And that's only going to push out the residents of the St. Paul that were born and raised in St. Paul. And then it's also going to create a deficiency of housing, which is what we're looking at now. That's what we see now, is a deficiency of housing.
There's been a lot of concern about the vacant CVS property on University Avenue and like the livability concerns related to homelessness and addiction. Like, what would you do to address that, both for the residents who live near them, the people who are suffering near that intersection? What do you do to address that as like an emergency that needs to be solved immediately?
It's so multifaceted, but my experience with organizing in this community around these type of issues is that often there's a business that is providing the drugs to the small time drug dealers that are serving drugs to people in community. I've had I'd say, what year was that? Maybe like 13 years ago. There was a corner store on the corner of Snelling, right by University, right across from that Taco Bell. And when I worked for the schools, I would often, after school, just kind of go hang out along the light rail to redirect my students to be on the right track, redirect them to rec centers, stop little fights from happening, that kind of stuff. And I identified that there was this corner store that was selling K2, which is a synthetic cannabis, to the young people in the community. And there was a mom that came up there one time, and she was really upset because her son was experiencing psychosis, and she knew that she got it from this corner store guy. And I basically just started organizing with community, and we pushed that corner store out of there. Now, this was like 13 years ago, but on Snelling, it quieted down. We didn't have many issues. Maybe about 5 years ago, I was living right around the corner from the BP gas station on Hamlin and University. I started doing community organizing around that. We started to have meetings at the police station to try to get them to address the issues that we were seeing around there. And the police raided that space. The BP found drugs, shut it down. And then after that, it quieted down on University and Hamlin. So I think the immediate is to really identify who is the person bringing the drugs into the community. Let's start there, because it's happening. There's folks that are supplying the community with drugs, right? And so that's the first thing. The second thing is to really work with the county to address the main issues. The core issues that we're dealing with along University are housing instability, mental health, and chemical dependency. I know this because I do a lot of outreach along 94. Now, when I was doing this outreach along 94, there was often these, believe it or not, the community that's out there cares about cleanliness. And so they would have these morning meetings to talk about keeping the space clean, whether it was in Unidale Mall or along the light rail or different areas, right? And I happened to roll up on one of their community meetings they were having and was able to get a lot of input from folks that are unhoused and dealing with chemical dependency and mental health. And one of the things that they said about that CVS is that they really wish that they would turn that into a resource space so that they could have accessible resources. Often, when you're addicted to the drugs, you don't want to go far from where you can have access to that because you're, and this is just me understanding psyche, because my degree I'm working on is African American Studies and Psychology. So they don't want to go too far from where the drugs are at. And so to go down to the county to start to begin to get resources, that's an all-day process. And so they will get sick in the process of doing that. And so if we could do like a one-stop hub, they were expressing that would be motivation enough for them to stay clean for a day to kind of get their head together, because they'd be able to shower and maybe do their laundry, maybe get some methadone or, some of the resources that they might need. And it's right there in the space that they're in. It reminded me of, what country is that? Portugal. I think it's Portugal, where they have legal drugs.
Right.
Is that right? Right. Okay.
I think so.
Right. So in Portugal, all drugs are legal, but yet they don't have a public drug use problem because they have, they give out administrative citations to folks that are caught using. And then when they're caught, they go to administrative court, and they have these hubs and these, they're like resource spaces, but they're also chemical dependency treatment centers that are right in the community, though. They don't send them out to the suburbs away from their families. They do chemical dependency right in their community. And it reminded me of kind of like the idea of doing something like that. And so that was initially when I was working with the city and the county to talk about and organizing around this issue. That was something that I was bringing to them. I think it's important that we start to establish community-based, culturally relevant, chemical dependency treatment centers. And I said this maybe 10 years ago when fentanyl was really first hitting the streets, was like, we need to open up all along University. I told this to Rita Moran. Every single open spot that we have on University, we should be establishing some sort of chemical dependency treatment center. Because the way that fentanyl was kind of sweeping through our nation based on like, it was kind of a rollover from Percocets. And then there was this whole like media kind of like music campaign around using these type of drugs. I kind of foreseen what we were about to get into and was saying we are going to need these chemical dependency spaces. So it is, like I said, multifaceted, but I will continue to stand on the fact that the responsibility of addressing the core issue that we're seeing along 94 is the responsibility of the county. It is a housing issue. It's a mental health issue. It's a chemical dependency issue. And if we're going to look at any sort of policing to address the situation, we should be looking at community ambassadors and community partners that really know how to work with the community and continue to advocate and organize around the issues so that we can start to get things that actually work, not just put Band-Aids on it.
So you mentioned property taxes earlier as a big issue, and they're going up very fast, all over, especially in St. Paul. And on your website, you talk about new revenue streams that you'd be interested in. I'm curious, what do you see as some potential new revenue streams to mitigate property tax increases?
Well, one thing I learned during the unrest when I was organizing around trying to sustain the Midway shopping center that was there was that development is like 20 years out, 30 years out. And so to be able to stop something that was already in progress 10 years ago is really hard. And so one thing that I know is that Bill McGuire, who is the owner of the soccer stadium, he has a plan for that area. One of the plans is he wants to build a hotel in that space. He wants to build what he calls 2 big top restaurants in that space, right? He has a second phase vision of a 4,000 person music venue, right? Now, those are some things that I'm not going to be able to stop. Was it my choice? Are those the things that I would choose to put in that space? Probably not. I probably would want to develop it a little bit different, but that's what's coming. And so how do we do that in a way that's smart? How do we do that in a way that is going to really draw in more tax dollars into the city of St. Paul? And one of the things I keep talking about is this cultural pot of gold that we have right here in our city. Right along Snelling Avenue, we have the West African corridor. It's called Little Africa, that can highlight some of the culture of West Africa, the foods and the music and the people, right? And then along University, there's a lot really Vietnamese and Hmong corridor when you get down towards Lexington. But we could move things closer into that direction. We could highlight the Rondo community in that area. And one of the things why I think that's so important is because when I look around at all the big cities that are thriving off of outside tax dollars, they have cultural corridors. And I mean, if you think about Miami or even Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, I mean, pretty much anywhere you go, even in Denver, Colorado these days, they're starting to build up these cultural corridors because people want culture. We have it right here in our city. In the St. Paul schools, we speak 144 different languages. So if there's ways that we can pull some of those cultures and uplift them in our city, invest in their businesses, invest in the businesses, and draw people into the soccer stadium to go to the hotel, eat at a nice restaurant, enjoy some of the culture that's right here around the soccer stadium, we can actually start to generate tax dollars into the city. And I say that specifically because I'm a big and tall person. We all know that. But I'm not the only big and tall person in the city of St. Paul. But I'm
also a big and tall person.
Right. But there's nowhere in the city of St. Paul to buy any big and tall clothes. Nothing. Like you can't buy a pair of jeans. You can't buy a big and tall shirt. There's nothing like that in the whole city. So when I go shopping, I'm in Woodbury, I'm in Roseville, I'm in Maple Grove, I'm Bloomington, right? And while I'm out there, I buy some clothes, I buy the things that I need for my house. I go to Costco, I get me some gas, I stop at the PF Chang's and get me some lettuce wraps, right? So every time I get paid and I go shopping, I'm going to a whole nother city and I'm dropping my tax dollars there. Not just that, but we don't even have major movie theaters in our city. And I know that that's an issue in Minneapolis too. We have you guys have smaller ones, but you have a whole lot more smaller than we do. But when I think about like major motion pictures, it's probably been at least 20 years since I've been to a major motion picture in the city of St. Paul. That's a lot of tax dollars. It's not just me, it's everybody else in the whole city who goes to see X-Men in Roseville or Woodbury or wherever they go to see it. Everybody's dropping their tax dollars out there, and we have to create and develop in a way that draws people from Burnsville, Albert Lee, wherever, up into the city of St. Paul, enjoy the soccer stadium, catch the light rail downtown, enjoy the Saints, go to a concert, go to the orchestra, and then get in your car and drive back to Albert Lee because we need to be able to generate those type of tax dollars. And every time I knew that there was a big development coming through, such as the light rail, I always was like, well, they'll figure it out. I didn't really get too involved. I had a mentor. Her name was Katie McGuat, and she used to try to pull me into those development meetings. And I'm like, Miss McGuat, that's not my jam, whatever. Here's my thoughts. And I go on about my business. But then when it gets said and done, I look at the whole structure of the light rail and I'm like, why would they put the light rail on the ground in the intersection of Snelling and University? That intersection has been the highest accident-prone intersection in the entire state for at least 40 years. So why would you put a train there on the ground? Why didn't it go up high like it does on Lake Street, right? And so it's like some of those smart politics that I want to get involved in while this stuff is rolling through the cities. I want to be able to be at the table to have those conversations so that we do it in a way that really does draw those people into our city. And we really do generate the tax dollars and not just build a bunch of buildings. And then we're just sitting around looking at new buildings and it's costing the homeowners even more money.
So we've got a little bit more time left. I want to close it out by having you give us the hard-hitting case for Chauntyll Allen to be the next council member. What are you offering that the other candidates are not? Just go negative if you have to. You insult the other candidates if you want.
Nah. If you're running for an office, especially for city council, you gotta love this city. And so there's no reason for me to speak bad about any of the other candidates. But what I can say about me is that I have the experience of governance. I've been on the school board. This is my second term. I've learned a lot in the process, and I've kind of started to recognize where the disconnect between the people and the governance body is happening. And I'm ready to share that on the city council. I also feel like I have really amazing relationships with a lot of the other city council members. And I think that we can build a united front that can help us move the city forward in a way that our city is looking for and asking for. They elected a all-woman progressive city council, right? That's what they want to see. They want to see women be progressive and move this city forward. And I know that I'm the person that can get in cahoots with the other 6 council people and start to make some stuff shake. I'm a fighter. I always have been. I show up for community in the toughest of times. I was just talking to my campaign manager about how during the unrest, when they shut down all the grocery stores across the Twin Cities, and even our superintendent refused to do food distribution to our students. And immediately I was on the phone with about 7 or 8 organizers, and we established a 7 a.m. meeting daily so that we could organize and create food distributions all across the Twin Cities. And I want to say within like 3 days, we had almost 20 something food distribution sites across the city of St. Paul, even into the West Side, that was organized by grassroots organizers and led by volunteers. And, the food was donated from community and people ate well. People were living in abundance. And that's the kind of energy that I think people want to see during a crisis. We know we have some crises coming down the pipeline, and I believe that I'm the leader that this community needs to see in order to lead us there.
Well, thank you, Chauntyll Allen, running for St. Paul City Council in Ward 4. The special election is August 12th. I'm your host, John Edwards. This has been the Wedge Live podcast. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.